The Fujifilm X-Pro3 is a camera that I was waiting a very long time to get my hands on. And listen, I made a 30-minute review that outlines what this camera can do. In this video, I want to revisit my initial question and answer this because after a year of traveling all over the world and pushing this thing to its limits, I think I know where it lands. Here's another long-term review. I went from photographer to a photographer that documents his story on YouTube pretty quickly. And throughout that process, I've come to realize that if the means allowed for it, if the resources allowed for it, I wasn't gonna squint at getting specialized tools to allow me to document and do my job better. It was just something that I was open to and not gonna be able to be too frugal about. And the X-Pro3 is, well, probably the most specialized digital camera that I have. After carrying it around the world for a year, the looks have not waned on me. The titanium stamped top plate of this camera still has this unique sex appeal to it. It has that signature slant that Fujifilm has introduced with their first iteration, but feels a lot more subdued and tamed with its natural curves. Long gone is the D-pad in favor of a more streamlined look, and also it makes room for the novel display on this camera. Yes, let's just get this out of the way right now. Yes, the LCD is on the inside and you have a sub-LCD on the outside. And in my review, I talk about this at length if you want to hear me go into more of the details. But after a year of using it, I guess the important question is, do I feel ripped off? Do I feel like this is not good? Well, for me, not at all. While it still might alienate a ton of photographers out there, there is still a huge amount of people, such as myself, that have felt even deeper in love after using this camera for a considerable amount of time, where the shooting experience feels like you're closer to that moment. If you were expecting me to change my mind after owning this thing for so long, I'm sorry to tell you I didn't. In fact, I probably went even more hardline that for a certain group of photographers, this is geared toward a better image creation process. And especially when you're doing low angle photography, I think this is the best camera to do it with, where you have this unobstructed view instead of a display that comes out to the side and almost gives it away that you're trying to take a shot. Quite simply, it's a physical reminder to be in the moment. And if I'm being honest, I f***ing love it. And it might not be for everyone, but I tell you, those that do enjoy it really do enjoy it. Now, I will talk about some of the issues I do have with this camera, but first I want to give some credit to the guts because this thing was well made. I had hands-on time with a pre-production model, and in that model, I had an issue with the viewfinder that, made some of the blog sites, but it never really became a big issue. It seems like they solved that problem when it was shipping. So when you're looking at the viewfinder, when you're looking at the buttons, the dials, the display, the sub-LCD, I didn't have any issues with it at all. And the bar was set pretty high because we were spoiled by the X-T3. When that camera came out, there was noise about it being made in China and not Japan, and it'd lead to issues. Well, that camera for me, it's still kicking. It's still working great, and it still has not had any issues. So with that bar that high, I'm happy to see that this camera has not failed on me yet. Now, this is anecdotal, and your experience will vary, but again, for all the things we've done with this camera, it is impressive. There was one small situation when I took this camera to Mumbai, across India for that matter, and there was a lot of dust. There was a lot of dust and debris in the environment, and my ISO dial, my exposure dial, and the on-off switch, there was a bit of grinding there. And I thought, well, the functionality is still there and nothing is lost on it. I guess this is something I'm gonna deal with. But there was a viewer that commented on the video to let me know that simple dental floss, yes, this magical contraption called dental floss could solve that problem. So I literally took a piece of dental floss, ran it through the buttons and dials, and well, it works good as new. Didn't have any issues with this thing, and the dials, the clicks on the on-off switch, it works just as new. When you marry this reliability with the looks, you're left with a camera that makes you want to pick it up and shoot more. even more so than the X-T3 did. Paired with my Barton 1972 leather strap, it's a camera I love to have slung over my shoulder for trips and photo shoots alike. Oh, and I want you to know, I think it's the second prettiest camera that Fujifilm has ever made, at least in their modern lineup. The number one spot, that still goes to that X100V, because that thing is beautiful. I got to take this camera on the biggest project and maybe the only trip of 2020, and during this 3-week job across India, the X-Pro3 would be my go-to photography tool for capturing digital images. Mind you, this was a trip of a lifetime, and I quite easily, not to kind of show off or anything, just in a literal way, I could have taken any camera I wanted, and I elected to have this as my digital photography tool. Hell, I had the Canon 1DX Mark III, a pre-production model for this trip, and I opted to use this for image capture instead. And you might be thinking, why? Why this one? Quite simply, it just made the process fun. With a viewfinder off to the side and a body that wouldn't quit, this camera allowed me to be even more present in my capture process. The street photography scene in India was like heaven to me. I was always scouring around and seeing different compositions come to place. And if you want to know more about this experience, I'll leave a link to our travel photography show called Roaming, where we talk about this in our trip to Mumbai. But I will say, when I was using this camera, having the viewfinder to the side, I could form a bit of a human connection, more of a human connection with subjects. I can proactively look for that eye contact. And you know, when you are smiling with a camera like this, people actually see you're smiling, and in some ways, it's disarming. You kind of share that warmth. And you know, this really came to fruition in a moment where I was walking down and I saw this kid with a radiant laugh on a bus. And you know, so I angled up, I had the camera there, waited, I gave that disarming smile, and he smiled right back. And in that moment, I captured this lovely frame. And you know, it might be something that I'm making bigger than it is for some people. For me, and I think some creators will empathize with this, when you're able to form a connection with your subject, when you kind of humanize yourself in a way throughout your production, it makes this a much more enjoyable experience. And I would argue, in a lot of instances, allows you to get a better moment. I find I use this camera in two ways. When I'm shooting for fun in the street and more for myself, I use the optical viewfinder, where I'm just focused on the composition. I want to just get a really good frame. And when I switch to a studio commercial environment, I'm focused in the electronic viewfinder mode to ensure that I'm getting the right shot. And this is some awesome flexibility, because with the optical viewfinder, there's no lag, you're focusing on the moment, it works well with the 23 and 35mm lens options, and it just removes a layer of abstraction when you're actually looking to create an image. But when I'm working for a client in a more professional setting, I can ensure that I'm gonna get the shot that I need, a shot that has all the right ingredients. Again, something that you're just not gonna find in many other options on the market, not in this way. What's also appreciated is that there's not too much going on the back of this camera. So you really know what each button does, and they're differentiated enough, and you can reach them very easily to be able to capture in the moment. And I like this because you get up and running really quickly, and you can customize it to how you shoot. So for example, I can be looking through the viewfinder and press in the rear dial and know that that's gonna switch my custom profiles, which you can find all my recipes in the link in the description. But again, I can do that while still looking at my frame. Also, I can go to the function button above the quick menu button and press that in, and then rotate the dial to switch between white balance. Again, all by looking through the frame, not having to just go back and look at the camera. So it's something that I appreciate. I know some people would have wished that there was a D-pad. For me, it never became much of an issue because I was focusing mainly on image creation, almost exclusively on image creation. Unlike some other models, this camera has an elegant and minimal solution that keeps you shooting, and in a fascinating way, empowers you to keep creating. Now, this camera is not without its faults. In fact, I made an entire video talking about how this camera can get better. And I won't go over everything. If you want to see that, you can go back and check out that video. I'll just highlight there's a couple of ways that this camera can get noticeably better with version 4. The first thing would be that ISO dial. Please, I do not want to lift and hold to change the ISO. They gotta bring in that ISO dial that they introduced with the X100V, where you lift it up and it stays there and you can quickly rotate. The next thing I would say is to expand the frame lines of that optical and electronic viewfinder so you can use 16mm lenses. I think that if you go to the wider side and maybe even exclude the 90mm, that's gonna lead to a much better user experience. And I think the people that gravitate toward a camera like this will appreciate that more as well. Further, I'd like to see the inclusion of that new battery that they introduced with the X-T4. I mean, think about it, just doubling the life on a camera like this, that's really impressive. I know that it might add a little bit more depth to this camera, but I think that's a trade-off that, again, users of this camera will appreciate. And lastly, I will say, while it's not a must for me, I think with the shrinking of their IBIS unit that they introduced in the XS10, well, I think that version 4, if it included IBIS as well, that'd be a knockout of the park for Fujifilm. As some of you guys know, I get to play with just about every camera that comes out, and it's a really, fun experience to play around and see what other manufacturers are doing. And while the industry is shrinking, there has never been a better time to be a creator. You just have so much choice. And that's why when I look at a camera like this, I can safely say there's not really many solutions that are like it. Sure, you'll get a camera that can execute and maybe even produce a similar file or image, but it really comes back to the capture experience. There's not many cameras that have a capture experience like the X-Pro3. Sure, you'll have to almost entirely swear off video functionality for a product like this, but this is a unique tool that sits in a bit of a special place of its own. Now, I'm not gonna argue which camera is better than what. No, that's not really what this goal of this channel is all about. What I will say though is that the design, technology, and software of this camera make for an incredibly unique product that is very difficult to emulate by competitors. And while it might not be for everyone, there is no denying that a product like this deserves to exist. If you're seriously considering this camera, there's an argument to be made that the only other competitors are coming from the same manufacturer or a company out of Wetzlar, Germany. Adding this camera to my kit and making it my go-to digital solution for photography has changed my life in a real way. And I'll say it's not the same delta as the X-T3 did, but still a noticeable way with this X-Pro3. This camera has instilled a bit of confidence and swagger in a way where many other cameras didn't really do as well, in a way that I can see the final image even before I take it. It's hard to contextualize, but I think that if you're working in the pro space, you'll appreciate this if you're doing it for years and years and years, that ability to kind of see the shot before you take the shot. A similar analogy would be a chef and his or her go-to knife. Sure, a great chef can take any knife and make the cut, but when they have their knife, the one that they swear by, well, it just adds a little bit of magic to that process. I've come a long way as a photographer in the last 3 years, and at this point, I can confidently tell you that you give me any camera, and I'll take a great shot with respect to the subjects that I capture. But when I have this camera in my hand, well, it just adds a bit of magic. It makes that process more enjoyable. It gives that little bit of confidence and swagger throughout the capture process. There's a sense of steadiness that this camera brings where I know it's just gonna get out of the way and allow me to do my job. I've talked about it before, but I'll say it again. Fujifilm is a special manufacturer in that they produce many products that empower you to create. The Fujifilm X-Pro3 is a camera that will empower image makers to create. That is a powerful fucking feeling. And I know it might sound a little bit like hyperbole for some people, but let me remind those, I'm not saying that this camera will evoke that feeling for you, but you may recognize that similar feeling with something else. For me, when the job requires digital image creation, this is the camera that I reach for because it empowers me to create. It gives me the confidence, it gives me the swagger, the steadiness to be in the moment, and in a special way, it gets out of the way. I imagine that this answer may not change for a very long time. If you find yourself as someone who's been seriously considering this camera, find a way to get your hands on this camera and get some reps in. Truly, test drive this thing as much as you can because right away, you'll know if you catch those same feels. And when you do, if you do, enjoy the fucking ride. Thank you so much for watching another long-term review on this channel. More importantly, let's continue the conversation in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think. So let's continue the conversation there. And if you're not already, please do hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you know when a new video comes out. We have some special content planned for the new year and I don't think you want to miss it. As always, my name's Gajan. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time.